The silent trap of borrowed dreams. You probably don't even remember when it started. That quiet, almost invisible moment when your idea of success stopped being your own. Maybe it was the day someone praised you for doing something you didn't actually enjoy. Maybe it was the time your parents said, "This is a stable career," or when you scrolled through someone's perfect highlight reel online and thought, "That's what winning must look like." Whatever it was, something shifted. Without realizing it, you started walking a path that wasn't entirely yours. And that's the scary part. Most people don't notice they're trapped. They wake up every day chasing a dream that doesn't belong to them, fueled by someone else's version of what a successful life should look like. You grind, you sacrifice, you compare, and you convince yourself it's worth it because isn't this what success is supposed to feel like? But deep down, there's this quiet ache, this whisper saying something's off. That whisper is your real self trying to speak. The self that remembers what joy felt like before the world told you what to want. Think about how it starts. As kids, you probably had an instinct for what you loved: drawing, building, exploring, imagining. You didn't care about validation or metrics. You just did it because it made you feel alive. But somewhere along the way, the world stepped in. You were told to be practical, to be realistic, to choose paths that make sense. Society taught you that passion is risky, but approval is safe. And so you learned to trade authenticity for acceptance. You went from asking, "What excites me?" to asking, "What will impress them?" That's the silent trap, the moment your compass starts pointing outward instead of inward. The truth is, this happens to almost everyone. Human beings are wired for social belonging. We crave validation because, historically, survival depended on it. But modern society weaponizes that instinct. The more we compare, the easier it is for industries, influencers, and institutions to sell us a vision of success that benefits them more than us. You see it everywhere. The entrepreneur who secretly hates their business but keeps pushing because they can't bear to look like a quitter. The corporate high achiever who's drowning in burnout but tells themselves, "Once I reach the next promotion, it'll all make sense." The student chasing a degree they never wanted because they're terrified of disappointing their parents. It's a silent epidemic. People succeeding at things that don't make them feel successful. And the worst part, you can't fix what you don't admit. The world celebrates you for following the rules. You get praise, recognition, maybe even money. From the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, something feels counterfeit. You feel productive but not fulfilled. You feel admired but not understood. You've achieved the dream, but it's someone else's, and the victory feels hollow. If you've ever hit a milestone and felt nothing, that's the signal. That's your identity asking for a rewrite. Let's dig deeper. Every borrowed dream has a blueprint, a belief you absorbed without question. Maybe you grew up hearing, "You must be successful to be respected," or "Stability matters more than happiness," or "You can't make money doing what you love." These beliefs shape your definition of success before you even get a say. They become the invisible architects of your life choices. It's like installing someone else's software in your brain and wondering why it keeps crashing. You see, success isn't universal. It's cultural, contextual, and deeply personal. What looks like success in one society might be seen as failure in another. Yet most people never stop to question the version they inherited. They live by default, not design. And when you live by default, you become easy to control. The modern world thrives on comparison. Every platform, every ad, every headline is designed to make you feel slightly behind, slightly less. Because if you feel incomplete, you'll keep chasing, you'll keep buying, you'll keep trying to close the gap between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. But thriving, real thriving, starts when you stop running. It starts when you realize that success without peace is just another kind of failure. This doesn't mean ambition is bad. It means you start asking why before you chase. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's metrics. You begin to define success as something internal, something that aligns with who you are, not who you're expected to be. And yes, that hurts, because once you realize you've been living someone else's dream, there's grief. You mourn the time you lost pretending. You mourn the parts of yourself you silenced to fit in. But in that mourning, you also begin to heal. Imagine standing in front of a mirror and asking, "Who am I without all the expectations?" For many people, that's terrifying, because when you strip away the roles, the titles, and the applause, what's left? What's left is truth. And truth feels both freeing and fragile at first. You start to notice the small betrayals, the job you hate but keep for status, the relationship that looks perfect online but feels empty, the goals that sound impressive but drain your joy. You see how much of your energy went into performing instead of living. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. This is the awakening stage, the uncomfortable clarity that precedes change. And here's the good news. The moment you realize you've been chasing someone else's dream, you're already halfway free. Breaking this awareness breaks the spell. You start recognizing that success doesn't have to look one way. It doesn't have to mean the biggest house, the fanciest title, or the loudest applause. Sometimes success is peace. Sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's the ability to wake up and feel unhurried. Let's be honest. Walking away from borrowed dreams takes courage. You'll face resistance, confusion, even guilt. People might call you ungrateful or indecisive. They might not understand why you'd give up a path that works. But that's because they're still living inside the same script you're trying to rewrite. And that's okay. You're not here to convince them. You're here to reclaim you. When you stop living for applause, you start living with alignment. You start caring less about looking successful and more about feeling fulfilled. You begin to realize that the purpose of success isn't to impress others. It's to express yourself fully. So here's your first challenge in this identity shift. Audit your ambitions. Take a hard look at every goal you're chasing and ask yourself, who told me I should want this? If the answer points outside you to culture, family, peers, or fear, then maybe it's time to reevaluate. Because real success doesn't need validation to feel right. It feels right because it aligns with your truth, not the world's checklist. You've probably been running a marathon that never ends. Every finish line just moves further ahead. But once you step off that track, once you start asking deeper questions, everything changes. You begin to see that success isn't something you chase. It's something you define. That's the first step towards freedom. The moment you recognize the trap, you stop being its prisoner. You start to remember who you were before the noise, before the comparison, before the expectations. And from there, you can start rebuilding, not based on borrowed blueprints, but on your own design. Because surviving on someone else's dream will always feel like dying slowly. But living by your own definition of success, that's when you finally start to thrive.
2. How the world programs your idea of success. You probably think your dreams are your own, but if we're being honest, most of them were handed to you, repackaged, and sold as aspiration. From childhood, society starts writing your script before you even realize you're holding the pen. The schools, the ads, the influencers, the headlines, they all whisper the same story. That success has one shape, one direction, and one definition. And if you don't fit that mold, you're behind. You grow up in a system that praises achievement more than alignment. You're told to chase grades, titles, wealth, and reputation, not curiosity, purpose, or peace. The world doesn't ask, what kind of life feels meaningful to you? It asks, what can you do to prove your worth? And so, the programming begins. It starts innocently, when adults clap louder for your A's than for your kindness. When you hear that smart kids become doctors, engineers, or lawyers. When creativity is treated like a hobby, not a viable path. Bit by bit, your natural interests are edited down until you're left with the acceptable ones. Then comes the media, the silent sculptor of modern values. Every day, you're flooded with images of success that look suspiciously uniform. Expensive cars, luxury vacations, curated lifestyles. And the more you see them, the more you start to equate happiness with display. It's not enough to be content. You have to look content, preferably on a screen, under perfect lighting. The trap deepens because it's not just individuals who shape this, it's systems. Corporations profit when you feel inadequate. Social platforms thrive when you compare. The entire economy runs smoother when you're chasing something you can never quite catch. Think about it. The moment you buy what's trendy, another must-have shows up. The moment you reach one milestone, another is dangled in front of you. There's always a new bar, a higher level, a shinier version of better. You're caught in an endless game that never lets you win. And the scariest part is you start to internalize the rules. You start judging yourself by the world's scoreboard, the job title, the car brand, the relationship status, the follower count. You might tell yourself you're just being ambitious, but deep down, you know something feels off. Because no matter how much you achieve, it never feels enough. That's the symptom of programming. External validation becomes your oxygen. You start living for the next compliment, the next approval, the next sign that you're doing well. And in that process, you lose sight of something crucial: why you're doing any of it. There's a psychological principle called social proof. The idea that when people are uncertain, they look to others for cues on how to behave. It's a survival mechanism that helped our ancestors stick together. But in the modern age, it's become a trap. When you're constantly surrounded by curated success stories, your brain starts mistaking popularity for truth. You assume that if everyone's chasing it, it must be worth chasing. But here's the uncomfortable reality. The majority isn't always right. Most people are chasing comfort, not fulfillment. Approval, not purpose. And just because something is normal doesn't mean it's right for you.
Cultural programming runs so deep that even rebellion can be an illusion. Think about how often being different still follows a trend. The aesthetic of uniqueness gets mass-produced, sold, and recycled until even individuality becomes another form of conformity. You're told to be yourself, but only within the limits of what's marketable. And so, you play roles without realizing it. The successful adult, the grind mindset achiever, the perfect parent, the goal-oriented dreamer, the self-made hustler. Every role comes with expectations, a script, and an invisible audience watching to see if you perform it right. If you've ever felt exhausted but afraid to slow down, that's the performance talking. Because slowing down feels like failure in a world addicted to motion. But here's the truth. What you chase becomes your master. If you're chasing status, your peace depends on perception. If you're chasing wealth, your worth depends on numbers. If you're chasing perfection,
Your identity depends on flaws you can never erase. And the world loves that, because a person who's never satisfied keeps spending, working, posting, comparing. The system runs on your exhaustion. Now, none of this means ambition is wrong. Wanting more for yourself isn't the issue. The issue is why. When the why is borrowed, your drive turns into self-destruction. Let's make it real. Look at how many people are miserable doing what they once thought would make them happy. The doctor who feels trapped in a prestigious but soul-crushing career. The influencer who looks perfect online but feels empty offline. The entrepreneur who built an empire but lost their peace along the way. They're not failures. They're proof that programming without introspection leads to disconnection. Here's what's even more revealing. Most people don't stop to question it until something breaks. A burnout, a breakdown, a quiet crisis of meaning. Because when your identity is built on the world's script, it only takes one plot twist to collapse everything. So how do you rewrite it? It starts with awareness, realizing that the voice telling you what success should look like might not be yours. It could be the voice of your parents, your culture, or an entire system designed to make you chase endlessly. Once you notice that, you start to see how deep the programming goes. Why do you feel guilty resting? Why do you feel embarrassed failing? Why do you crave applause more than inner peace? Each answer reveals who's been writing your story. The next step is observation. Pay attention to what triggers your feelings of inadequacy. Is it seeing someone else's achievement online? Is it being around people who define worth by possessions? Is it the silence that comes when you stop performing and start being? That discomfort isn't a sign you're lost. It's a sign you're waking up. Here's what makes thrivers different from survivors in this game. Survivors adapt to the world's script. Thrivers rewrite it. Survivors chase approval. Thrivers chase alignment. Survivors measure themselves against others. Thrivers measure themselves against growth. A thriver knows that the world's definition of success is too small for a soul that wants meaning. When you step back and look at the system with clarity, you start realizing how much of your potential has been redirected toward imitation. You were born original, but the world taught you to compete instead of create, to compare instead of connect. And breaking that programming doesn't mean rejecting everything the world values. It means choosing consciously. If wealth, achievement, or recognition matter to you, that's fine. But it should be your choice, not a reflex. The real victory isn't in rejecting success. It's in redefining it. Because at some point, you'll notice something strange. The people who seem most at peace often stopped chasing the loudest prizes. They figured out that fulfillment is quiet, that meaning doesn't need a spotlight. When you begin to see the programming for what it is, a collective illusion built on comparison, you can finally breathe. You can look at the endless race and realize you don't have to run anymore. You can walk. You can pause. You can even change direction. That's the shift. The moment you stop asking, what will make me look successful? And start asking, what will make me feel whole? That's when your life starts to turn. It's not rebellion, it's realignment. And in a world that profits from your confusion, clarity is the ultimate form of freedom.
3. The moment it finally clicks. There's a point in your life, and it doesn't matter whether you're 16 or 60, when something inside you finally gets tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, a deeper exhaustion. The exhaustion that comes from performing a version of yourself that was never truly yours. You wake up one day and the routine feels heavier than usual. Your alarm rings, and instead of jumping up, you lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly your life stopped being something you actively chose and became something you just maintained. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? You're functioning, you're doing what people expect, you're checking the boxes, maybe school, maybe a job, maybe responsibilities. But something inside you feels like it's living on a delay, like the real you is watching from a distance and whispering, "Is this it? Is this what we traded our time for?" And the wild part is that nobody warns you about this moment. Nobody prepares you for the quiet collision between who you were taught to be and who you actually are. It sneaks up on you in the middle of doing something ordinary, sitting in traffic, scrolling through social media, finishing another task, getting another congratulations you don't even feel excited about. It creeps in when someone praises you for something that doesn't even feel like an achievement anymore to you, or when you hit a milestone that society calls success, but the satisfaction fades faster than the notification sound. It creeps in when you look at your own life and the first thought isn't pride, it's, why does this still not feel like me? You don't realize it at first. You brush it off. You tell yourself you're just tired or stressed or overwhelmed. But deep down, something is shifting. A crack forming in the script you've been following. A script you didn't write. And then slowly, the realization begins to take shape. You've been chasing a definition of success that doesn't belong to you. Maybe it came from your parents, the subtle pressure to be realistic, the expectation to aim for stability instead of fulfillment. Maybe it came from culture, the unspoken rules about what a respectable life looks like. Or maybe it came from the internet, the endless feed of people showing off their achievements, making you assume those achievements define happiness. And the truth is, none of this is your fault. Humans imitate before they create. We copy before we customize. We adopt the world's definition of success because it feels safer than facing the terrifying blank page of defining our own. It's like wearing shoes everyone else swears are perfect, even though they blister your feet every day. You keep walking because you think the pain means you're earning it. But eventually, you reach a point where you can't ignore the discomfort anymore. It's not a dramatic breakdown. It's not always a crisis. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment of clarity. A moment where you realize the ladder you've been climbing might be leaning on the wrong building. You're going up, but where? You're progressing, but toward what? And in that moment, even the achievements you once bragged about feel strangely hollow. This is the beginning of the identity shift. Not the glamorous part, not the breakthrough, but the unsettling internal whisper that says, "This isn't me." That whisper is uncomfortable, but it's also the most honest voice you've had in years. You start questioning things you never dared to question before. Why did I choose this path? What was I trying to prove? Who was I trying to impress? What version of me made these decisions, and does that version still exist? These questions hit hard because they undress your life. They pull back the curtain and expose the truth. You've been outsourcing your definition of success, letting external noise dictate your internal compass, following cultural templates like they were divine instructions. But the truth is, none of this is your fault. Humans imitate before they create. We copy before we customize. We adopt the world's definition of success because it feels safer than facing the terrifying blank page of defining our own.
It's like wearing shoes everyone else swears are perfect, even though they blister your feet every day. You keep walking because you think the pain means you're earning it. But eventually, you reach a point where you can't ignore the discomfort anymore. It's not a dramatic breakdown. It's not always a crisis. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment of clarity. A moment where you realize the ladder you've been climbing might be leaning on the wrong building. You're going up, but where? You're progressing, but toward what? And in that moment, even the achievements you once bragged about feel strangely hollow. This is the beginning of the identity shift. Not the glamorous part, not the breakthrough, but the unsettling internal whisper that says, "This isn't me." That whisper is uncomfortable, but it's also the most honest voice you've had in years. You start questioning things you never dared to question before. Why did I choose this path? What was I trying to prove? Who was I trying to impress? What version of me made these decisions, and does that version still exist? These questions hit hard because they undress your life. They pull back the curtain and expose the truth. You've been outsourcing your definition of success, letting external noise dictate your internal compass, following cultural templates like they were divine instructions. But the truth is, none of this is your fault. Humans imitate before they create. We copy before we customize. We adopt the world's definition of success because it feels safer than facing the terrifying blank page of defining our own. It's like wearing shoes everyone else swears are perfect, even though they blister your feet every day. You keep walking because you think the pain means you're earning it. But eventually, you reach a point where you can't ignore the discomfort anymore. It's not a dramatic breakdown. It's not always a crisis. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment of clarity, a moment where you realize the ladder you've been climbing might be leaning on the wrong building. You're going up, but where? You're progressing, but toward what? And in that moment, even the achievements you once bragged about feel strangely hollow. This is the beginning of the identity shift. Not the glamorous part, not the breakthrough, but the unsettling internal whisper that says, "This isn't me." That whisper is uncomfortable, but it's also the most honest voice you've had in years. You start questioning things you never dared to question before. Why did I choose this path? What was I trying to prove? Who was I trying to impress? What version of me made these decisions, and does that version still exist? And these questions hit hard because they undress your life. They pull back the curtain and expose the truth. You've been outsourcing your definition of success, letting external noise dictate your internal compass, following cultural templates like they were divine instructions. But the truth is, none of this is your fault. Humans imitate before they create. We copy before we customize. We adopt the world's definition of success because it feels safer than facing the terrifying blank page of defining our own. It's like wearing shoes everyone else swears are perfect, even though they blister your feet every day. You keep walking because you think the pain means you're earning it. And whether you realize it or not, this is the moment everything changes. Not because you've figured things out, but because you finally stopped lying to yourself. This is the moment you start waking up. This is the moment you stop running on autopilot. This is the moment the real you, the one buried under years of expectations, finally breathes. And it's only the beginning.
What nobody tells you is that once that moment hits, once the internal shift begins, your world doesn't explode. It doesn't collapse. It just tilts. Small things start feeling off. Conversations you used to tolerate suddenly feel draining.
The people you always tried to impress start looking more human, more flawed, more ordinary. Goals that once felt urgent now feel strangely irrelevant, like toys you outgrew but kept on a shelf because you didn't know where else to put them. Your sense of self goes into a quiet rearrangement. You're not falling apart, you're shedding. And shedding always feels like breaking at first. You start noticing that you don't laugh in certain rooms the way you used to. You don't feel excited about the achievements other people call big. You don't crave the same validation you once chased. You become hyper-aware of every choice you make, like your inner world is walking through your outer world with a flashlight asking, "Explain this. Why are we doing this? Who is this for?" It's uncomfortable, but the discomfort is honest. And slowly, you begin to see the patterns. You weren't climbing a ladder, you were performing on a stage. You weren't building a life, you were maintaining an image. You weren't chasing success, you were chasing permission. And realizing that hits differently. It doesn't make you angry, it makes you quiet. Because now you see how long you've been running, not towards something, but away from something. Away from disappointing people, away from failure, away from being misunderstood, away from the fear that your true desires might not be enough. So you built your identity like armor instead of a home. Strong, impressive, polished, but not livable. This moment of clarity is where most people retreat. They panic. They rush back into old habits because certainty, even if it's painful, feels safer than possibility. Survivors suppress the spark. They remind themselves, "Who am I to want more?" Thrivers ask, "Who am I if I don't?" The difference is tiny, but life-altering. And here's something you might notice around this time. People's opinions suddenly lose some of their power over you. It's not that you stop caring, you're still human, but their voices feel quieter, distant, like you finally turned down the volume on everyone else and heard your own thoughts for the first time in years. That's when another realization lands, one that feels even heavier, even truer, even more unsettling. You've been measuring your worth with someone else's ruler. You've been grading your own life with criteria you never agreed to. You've been crossing finish lines that don't satisfy you because you weren't running your own race. And when that truth settles in, it hits your ego, not your soul. Your ego hates it because it loves external validation. It thrives on applause, on titles, on achievements that look shiny from the outside. But your soul feels relieved because your soul doesn't care how things look. It cares how things feel. And for the first time in a long time, you're starting to feel again. Not the numbing, distracted, performative version of feeling, real feeling. The kind that whispers, "I think I want my life back." But here's where the real identity shift begins. You start remembering the things that used to matter to you before the world taught you what should matter. You remember who you were before you started editing yourself, before you filtered your dreams down to what was acceptable, before you believed you had to earn your right to be yourself. Memories resurface, passions, curiosities, possibilities, not because you're returning to the past, because the past held pieces of you that adulthood buried under practicality. You're not regressing, you're recovering. And this recovery is subtle. It's not a declaration, it's not a dramatic quitting your job moment, it's not a huge leap. It's the pause before the leap, the inhale before the decision, the awareness before the action. This space, This uncomfortable in-between stage is where people either evolve or retreat. Because now that you've seen the truth, you can't go back to pretending. But moving forward requires something scarier than any external pressure you've ever faced: internal honesty. You start asking deeper questions now. What do I actually want out of my life? What version of success feels like mine, not borrowed? If fear didn't exist, what direction would I move toward? If no one were watching, what decisions would I make? If validation disappeared, who would I become? And those questions are the beginning of self-authorship. That's the identity shift. Not the dramatic transformation at the end of the journey, but this moment of raw, uncomfortable truth where you stop hiding from yourself. This is the moment where survivors and thrivers permanently diverge. A survivor will acknowledge these questions, feel overwhelmed by them, and then push them aside. They'll say, "Not now, maybe later. It's too much." They'll fall back into routine, convincing themselves the timing isn't right. But a thriver leans into the discomfort. They don't have the answers yet, but they're willing to sit in the confusion. They're willing to admit the truth. My life is changing, even if I don't understand how yet. A thriver gives themselves permission to explore, to rethink, to detach, to observe. Not impulsively, but intentionally. They stop over-explaining themselves. They stop begging for approval. They stop playing a role. They become a student of themselves again. And that's where the shift truly begins. Not when you change your life, but when you change your relationship with yourself. Because thriving isn't about confidence. It's about alignment. It's not about having everything figured out. It's about facing everything honestly. It's not about achieving more. It's about becoming more authentic. You start to realize that the life that fits you doesn't scare you. It frees you. It brings peace, not pressure. It energizes you instead of draining you. And once that realization settles in your chest, something powerful happens. You stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What do I think?" You stop living for applause and start living with intention. You stop chasing success and start defining it. You stop surviving your life and start shaping it. By the end of this moment, this quiet internal awakening, you're not the same person who started it. You haven't reinvented your life yet, but you've reinvented your awareness, and awareness always precedes transformation. This is where the old identity loosens its grip. This is where authenticity begins to breathe. This is where your true journey finally starts. And the path forward, the reconstruction, the rebuilding, the redefinition, that's where we're heading next.
4. Rebuilding your definition of success from the inside out. You know that strange mix of relief and panic that hits you when you finally admit to yourself that the life you've been chasing wasn't actually yours? That moment where everything gets quiet in your mind for the first time in years, but the silence feels louder than the noise you escaped. That's where rebuilding starts. Not in confidence, not in clarity, not in some perfect plan, but in that uncomfortable silence where you have no idea what your next chapter is supposed to look like. And honestly, that's the part nobody warns you about. Everyone talks about finding yourself, but nobody tells you it feels less like discovering a hidden treasure and more like opening your closet and realizing you've got nothing to wear because everything in there belongs to someone else. Every goal, every title, every dream you were chasing, gone. Or worse, they're still there, but you're suddenly aware they aren't truly yours, and now your brain refuses to pretend anymore. This stage feels messy, confusing, and embarrassingly empty. But that emptiness, it's not failure. It's space. It's the first time your mind isn't stuffed with everyone else's expectations. You finally have room to think, room to breathe, room to build, not perform, build. And the first building block is honesty. Brutal, uncomfortable honesty with yourself. Not the Instagram-friendly, I'm discovering my authentic self type of honesty. The kind where you sit with questions that poke holes in your ego. Questions you've avoided because you already suspect the answers won't flatter you. Questions like, if nobody applauded me for it, would I still want this? Or, who was I trying to impress when I set this goal? Or, did I really enjoy that achievement, or did I just enjoy people thinking I was impressive? You'd be surprised how many of your goals collapse under those questions. But the ones that stay standing, those are the ones you build from. And yes, it's unnerving, because for the first time, you're not being powered by fear, pressure, or comparison. You're being powered by curiosity. And curiosity feels weak at first because it's so quiet compared to fear. You're used to being driven by scarcity, by the feeling that you're falling behind, or you're not enough unless you prove something. When that engine shuts off, you assume something's wrong. But what's actually happening is that you're switching to a healthier engine, when your brain hasn't learned to trust yet. That's why this rebuilding stage is slower. It has to be. You're not just choosing new goals, you're detoxing from old motivations. And detoxing is rarely pretty. There are days you'll be tempted to run back to the old definition of success because at least it came with a clear checklist and external validation. There are days you'll feel guilty for slowing down, even though slowing down is the only reason you're starting to hear your real desires again. You'll feel weirdly unproductive, even though this is the most productive thing you've done in years. And on some nights, you'll lie there thinking, what if I don't find a new dream? What if there's no real me underneath all the layers? That fear shows up for almost everyone. But here's the part that should give you some peace. You don't find yourself like you find a lost key. You build yourself. You shape yourself. You choose yourself. Identity isn't discovered. It's sculpted. And sculpting begins with small things. Your real desires rarely show up as big epiphanies. They show up as tiny reactions you're not used to noticing, like, this actually energizes me, or I like the version of myself that shows up in this environment, or when I think of doing this long term, I don't feel dread. It's subtle, because your brain has been trained to respond more intensely to fear and pressure than to genuine excitement. So rebuilding your definition of success requires retraining your attention. Here's what that looks like. You start listening to what your body and mind do naturally, instead of forcing them into shapes that win approval. You notice what drains you and what fuels you. You experiment, not with the pressure of, this must be the thing, but with the gentler mindset of, let me just see. You stop making every decision a lifelong commitment and start treating it like exploration. And yes, this means unlearning the, I need to make the right choice every time mentality. You've probably lived in that mode so long that making a wrong move feels deadly. But here's the plot twist. The biggest mistake wasn't choosing the wrong thing. It was living in so much fear of choosing wrong that you defaulted to someone else's path entirely. Your new definition of success needs room for mistakes. If you don't give yourself that room, you'll accidentally rebuild the same cage you just escaped from. Mistakes aren't detours on the path to your identity, they're the chisels carving it out. Every time you try something and realize, nope, that's not me, you've learned something valuable about who you actually are. But rebuilding isn't just about subtracting what isn't yours. It's about learning what feeling aligned actually feels like. And alignment is not the same as ease. People romanticize it like, when you find your true path, everything flows. That's cute, but not real life. When something is aligned, it doesn't mean it's effortless. It means it feels meaningful enough that the effort finally feels worth it. It means even the hard days don't feel pointless. It means you don't have to hype yourself into caring.
Alignment feels like, I'd do this even if nobody clapped, even if it took longer, even if I had to start over. Not because you're some saint who doesn't care about recognition, but because this time, your desire is internal. You want it for reasons that make sense to you, even in private.
Another important part of rebuilding is learning to separate admiration from aspiration. You might admire someone's lifestyle, work ethic, or achievements, but admiration doesn't automatically mean that path is meant for you. You can admire a surgeon without wanting to perform surgery. You can admire a billionaire without wanting the lifestyle that comes with it. You can admire a creator without wanting the pressure they live with. A lot of people confuse admiration with destiny, and that confusion leads them straight into an identity crisis. You rebuild your definition of success by observing your reactions without letting them boss you around. Instead of, "I admire that person, so I should follow their path," it becomes, "I admire that person, so what quality about them resonates with me?" Maybe it's their independence, not their career. Maybe it's their discipline, not their achievements. Maybe it's their authenticity, not their fame. When you figure out the quality you're actually drawn to, you suddenly open up 10 new possible paths instead of boxing yourself into one. This is where most people miss it. They try to copy the path instead of understanding the principle. But once you get the principle, you have freedom. You can build your own version instead of replicating someone else's blueprint. And speaking of blueprints, one of the hardest but most freeing parts of this rebuilding stage is letting go of the timeline you thought you were supposed to be on. You know the one, "By this age, I should have done this," or "People my age are already doing that," or "Everyone I know has already achieved this milestone." That timeline is one of the biggest reasons people chase borrowed success. It tricks you into thinking you're behind, when in reality, you're just on a different path. The truth is, being behind only exists when everyone's racing toward the same finish line. Once you realize success is personal, the concept of being behind stops making sense. It's like saying you're behind in a race that only you are running. Drop the timeline. Drop the comparison. Drop the idea that your path is embarrassing because it's different. Every time you let go of one of those things, you gain a little more space to hear your actual goals. Space equals clarity. Clarity equals confidence. Confidence equals momentum. That's the rebuild. You also have to understand that your new definition of success might confuse some people, especially the ones who benefited from your old identity. Some will be uncomfortable because you stepping into your own direction forces them to think about theirs. Some will be annoyed because your old path was predictable and easy for them to understand. Some will even take it personally, as if your growth is a criticism of their choices. But their reactions aren't your responsibility, and none of them mean you're making a wrong move. Honestly, if everyone immediately approves of your new direction, chances are you didn't step far enough out of the old one. The real turning point in rebuilding comes when you stop trying to present your new life in a way that makes sense to others and start building a life that makes sense to you, even if other people won't get it until much later. Truth is, nobody sees the vision clearly at the beginning, not even you. You're shaping it one decision at a time. And here's something you'll notice. The more you build a life that aligns with who you actually are, the more your idea of success softens. It becomes less about proving and more about creating. Less about impressing and more about becoming. Less about chasing and more about choosing. You start making decisions from strength instead of fear. You start trusting your own instincts. You start respecting your own limits. You stop hustling for approval because validation stops being the fuel for your identity. You finally feel like a person, not a performance. And the wild part? When you build success from the inside out, the external achievements still come, often faster, often more naturally. But by the time they arrive, you're no longer addicted to them. You can enjoy them without depending on them. You can celebrate them without letting them define you. Rebuilding your definition of success doesn't make your life easier. It makes it real. It makes it yours. And that's the entire shift. Moving from a life you were pressured into to a life you consciously choose. This is the part where you stop surviving other people's expectations and start thriving in your own truth. And the more you rebuild from the inside, the more you realize something simple but life-changing. You were never lost. You were buried
under noise. Rebuilding is just the slow, patient process of clearing it away.
There's a point you hit, right after the shock settles, where everything becomes strangely quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like the quiet after a fire alarm stops screaming. You're not calm yet. You're just aware. Aware of how much noise was in your life. Aware of how many decisions you made on autopilot. Aware of how many things you pretended you wanted because other people called them admirable. You sit with that awareness, and it feels like you're holding your own life in your hands for the first time. And honestly, it's heavier than you expected. Because now that everything has cracked open, you finally see how much of your life was built on a script you didn't write. You see how you carried expectations like unpaid debts. You see how you traded authenticity for acceptance. You see how often you performed confidence while your real self waited quietly behind the curtain. But here's the wild thing. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That's both the blessing and the curse. The old version of you is still there, still trying to bargain, still whispering that maybe you're overthinking things. But the new awareness just raises an eyebrow, arms crossed, like, be serious. You know exactly what's happening. The final stage of this identity shift isn't fireworks. It's not a dramatic quitting your job moment. It's not you suddenly becoming fearless. It's simpler and more raw than that. It's the moment you decide to stop betraying yourself. You know that feeling you get when you finally take off a pair of shoes that never quite fit right? They looked good, they matched the outfit, people complimented them. But the whole time, your toes were quietly screaming. And when you finally take them off, you realized you tolerated years of discomfort because you were too used to pretending everything was fine. That's what this stage feels like. You begin to look back at who you were, the choices you made, the roles you played, not with guilt or anger, but with understanding. You weren't weak. You weren't clueless. You were surviving with the tools you had. You were navigating a world that rewarded conformity and punished authenticity. You were trying to earn love, not realizing you were losing yourself in the process. You realized that the version of success you chased wasn't malicious. It wasn't stupid. It was just mismatched. Like wearing someone else's prescription glasses and wondering why you keep bumping into walls. And now comes the uncomfortable part. Deciding what to do with that clarity. Because awareness without action eventually turns into regret. Action without alignment turns into chaos. So you stand at the intersection of both, figuring out what your next step actually is. You start asking different questions, bigger ones. And this time, you're not afraid of the answers. What kind of life feels like home to me? What would success look like if no one could see it? What goals feel nourishing instead of performative? What dream keeps tapping me on the shoulder no matter how much I try to ignore it? Who am I when nobody is watching and nobody expects anything? You realize you've been living outward in for a long time, letting the world tell you what should matter and then trying to rearrange your insides to match it. But thriving requires the opposite. It's an inside-out process. It starts with choosing yourself in ways that might look selfish to people who benefited from your self-abandonment. This is where letting go begins. Not the dramatic, cut everyone off type people preach online. No, this kind of letting go is quieter and more honest. It's when you stop negotiating with people or environments that keep shrinking you. It's when you stop forcing yourself into spaces you've outgrown. It's when you stop being loyal to identities that no longer reflect who you're becoming. You stop trying to earn the approval of people who don't even understand the life you're trying to build. And once that happens, you notice something shocking. Your fear starts losing its authority. The fear of disappointing people. The fear of starting over. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of choosing differently. The fear of wanting more. They don't vanish. They just become background noise instead of a script running your life. Because you finally understand that your life only expands when your identity expands with it. You can't thrive with a mindset designed for survival. You can't rewrite your story with a pen someone else is holding. And you definitely can't build a life that feels meaningful if you're still living for applause instead of alignment. So you begin the slow, intentional work of reconstructing yourself. You don't rush. You don't leap. You rebuild from the foundation up. You learn to choose goals based on resonance, not recognition. You learn to listen to your intuition instead of silencing it. You learn to let your values lead instead of your insecurities. You learn to trust your inner voice even when it whispers. You learn to define success in a way that doesn't require costumes, performance, or constant exhaustion. And that reconstruction isn't glamorous. Most of it looks boring from the outside, unlearning old habits, having honest conversations with yourself, admitting where you've been lying to yourself, adjusting your boundaries, telling the truth even when it shakes your voice. It's the emotional equivalent of moving out of a house you lived in for years but never decorated because you never felt like you belonged there. And now you're entering a place that feels like yours for the first time, empty, unfamiliar, but full of possibility. The loneliness hits sometimes. That's normal. People don't talk about how isolating self-authorship can feel at first. You're stepping out of a life that made sense to everyone else and into a life that finally makes sense to you. Of course your circle might shift. Of course some people won't get it. Of course some will interpret your growth as distance. But your relationship with yourself becomes too important to sacrifice just to make everyone else comfortable. Because the truth is this, the moment you stop living for who you were trained to be, you make room for who you actually are. And the person you're becoming, they're not confused. They're not lost. They're not dramatic. They're simply waking up. And waking up is rarely pretty, but it's always worth it. You find yourself taking more ownership over your decisions. You stop blaming circumstances for everything. You stop outsourcing your self-worth. You stop living reactively, waiting for life to force your hand, and start living intentionally. You start recognizing the difference between choices that feed your ego and choices that feed your soul. You stop mistaking productivity for purpose. You stop chasing life milestones just because they look good on paper. You start prioritizing what feels alive instead of what looks impressive. You stop hustling for a version of success that leaves you emotionally bankrupt. And at some point, you might not even notice exactly when, you start feeling lighter. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is finally honest. You're no longer pretending. You're no longer performing. You're no longer editing yourself to fit into a life that never truly fit you. That's when you start thriving. Not when you achieve something huge, not when your income changes, not when someone finally validates your choices. You start thriving the moment you choose authenticity over approval, the moment you stop chasing borrowed dreams, the moment you reclaim authorship of your life. Thriving is alignment. Thriving is agency. Thriving is self-respect in motion. Thriving is deciding that your life deserves to feel like yours. And here's the final truth, the one you weren't ready to hear at the beginning of this journey, but can finally absorb now. Success built on someone else's definition will always feel like failure. Success built on your definition will always feel like freedom. And once you taste that freedom, even a tiny bit, you'll never go back to the version of yourself who believed they had to earn their right to be themselves. That version of you survived. This version of you is going to thrive. And you didn't get here by accident. You got here by daring to ask the question most people avoid. Whose life am I living? Now you know the answer. And now, finally, you get to live your own.